The obsidian halls of the Quantum Dominion's Galactic Council headquarters stretched endlessly, their polished surfaces reflecting the carefully orchestrated atmosphere of terror. Fog machines hissed at strategic intervals, releasing ominous clouds that curled around the ankles of passing dignitaries. The background music, a specially commissioned symphony designed to induce unease through subliminal frequency patterns, swelled as Zorn Vex, senior diplomatic attaché, hurried down the corridor. Vex's steps were precise and measured. 20 years of service had taught him that protocols existed for a reason. The Empire had conquered 17 galactic sectors through the careful application of fear. And that fear began with the small things, the exact number of steps between subordinate and superior, the precise angle of one's bow, the careful modulation of one's voice when addressing the Supreme Leader. "Status report on the primitive planet," demanded High Council Minister Korza as Vex entered the antechamber. The minister did not look up from the holographic display floating before him, its red glow casting sinister shadows across his scale-plated face. "Earth remains unaware of our surveillance, High Minister," Vex responded, maintaining the regulation 7 paces from the superior officer's position. "The species continues to exhibit unpredictable behaviors that our algorithms struggle to categorize." "Elaborate," Korza ordered, finally turning his triple-pupiled eyes toward Vex. "They appear simultaneously capable of profound violence and extraordinary compassion," Vex explained, accessing his neural implant to retrieve the latest intelligence. "They create weapons of mass destruction, then establish elaborate rules about when not to use them. They poison their own atmosphere, then invest tremendous resources in preserving tiny, seemingly irrelevant species of flora and fauna. And their technology? Primitive by our standards. They've barely achieved rudimentary interplanetary travel. Their computational systems remain vulnerable to electromagnetic disruption. Their leaders still depend on popular approval for authority." Vex hesitated before adding, "However, our cultural analysis unit has noted one peculiarity. They employ something called humor during crisis situations. We've been unable to determine its strategic purpose." Korza dismissed this information with a claw wave. "Supreme Leader Drathar has already approved the standard protocol. We will make our presence known through a strategic display of overwhelming force. Their leaders will be given the choice between subservience or annihilation." He paused, eyes narrowing. "The usual approach." Vex nodded. The usual approach had worked for 10,000 cycles of Dominion expansion. Worlds fell into line when faced with the legendary wrath of Supreme Leader Drathar. Most species surrendered immediately upon hearing his name, a response conditioned by generations of carefully cultivated stories about his merciless nature and the fates of those who had dared to resist. Of course, Vex had his private doubts. The Dominion's cultural advancement had stagnated over the past millennium. Security systems hadn't been upgraded in decades. The same intimidation tactics had been recycled for so long that they'd become comfortable routines rather than innovative strategies. But such thoughts were dangerous, possibly even treasonous, so Vex kept them locked away in the small, unmonitored corner of his mind. "You will update the territorial expansion database and prepare the standard terms of submission," Korza continued. "The Supreme Leader expects—" An alarm shrieked through the chamber, cutting off the minister's words. Red emergency lights pulsed along the corridor walls. "Unauthorized vessel approaching Docking Bay 7, the automated security system announced. "Unknown configuration, unknown origin." Vex and Korza exchanged alarmed glances. Unauthorized approaches simply didn't happen. The Dominion's perimeter defenses were legendary, its orbital security grid impenetrable. "Dispatch security teams. Corza ordered, his voice tight with tension. "Activate containment protocols." But before these commands could be implemented, the alarm abruptly silenced itself. The emergency lights faded back to the standard ominous purple glow. "Security breach resolved," the system announced placidly. "Visitors processing through customs." "Visitors?" Vex repeated, feeling the first crawl of genuine fear along his spine. No one visited the Dominion. The Dominion visited you, typically with overwhelming force and non-negotiable terms of surrender. "Investigate immediately," Corza hissed. "Report directly to me." Vex hurried toward Docking Bay 7, mentally reviewing emergency protocols. If this was an infiltration attempt, it represented an unprecedented security failure. If it was a diplomatic mission, it violated every established procedure for interstellar communication. The scene that greeted him at the docking bay defied explanation. A battered transport vessel, small, asymmetrical, and patched in at least 7 places, sat in the center of the landing area. Its hull bore the crude insignia of a blue and green sphere, partially wrapped with what appeared to be a stylized eagle. Around it stood a contingent of Dominion security officers, their plasma rifles trained on 3 bizarre figures, who seemed utterly unconcerned by the weapons pointed at their vital organs. "Hey there," called the tallest of the 3, raising a hand in what might have been a greeting or possibly a threat display. "You folks in charge of this place? Impressive setup you've got. The fog machines are a bit much, though. Makes it hard to see where we're going." Vex froze, processing the creature's words. It was speaking in its native language. Yet somehow, Vex understood perfectly, suggesting they'd mastered some form of advanced universal translation technology that the Dominion's intelligence had failed to detect. "Identify yourselves," Vex demanded, maintaining protocol distance. "Captain Jake Brenner of Earth," the tall one replied, with a disturbing facial contortion that exposed its teeth. "This is Lieutenant Miguel Sanchez, my security officer, and Dr. Priyakumar, our cultural specialist." "How did you penetrate our defense grid?" Vex asked, trying to reconcile their primitive-looking vessel with this impossible security breach. The one called Sanchez shrugged. "We just followed the standard approach vector and transmitted greetings. Your guys seemed confused, but let us through when we offered these." He held up a small package. "Chocolate cookies. Universal Goodwill Ambassadors." "That's impossible," Vex stated flatly. "Our security systems—" "Could use an update," interrupted Dr. Priyakumar, the smallest of the 3. "We noticed your firewall architecture is running on binary encryption. We haven't used that since, what, the 2080s? "Not important right now," Captain Brenner said, stepping forward. He casually leaned against a sacred historical pillar, commemorating the Dominion's first 1,000 conquered worlds. "We're here to establish diplomatic relations between Earth and your— what did you call it again?" "The Quantum Dominion," Vex supplied automatically, shocked by the blatant disrespect for the sacred pillar. "Remove yourself from that monument immediately." "Sorry, my bad," Brenner said, straightening up. He didn't sound sorry at all. "Look, we've been picking up your surveillance signals for a while now. Figured it was time to introduce ourselves properly instead of being creepily watched from a distance. You detected our stealth observers." Vex felt his world tilting sideways. Those systems were supposed to be undetectable to pre-warp civilizations. "Oh yeah," Sanchez confirmed, fiddling with a small device in his hand. "We've got teenagers who can hack your observation drones for fun. No offense, but your tech security is—" He made a wobbling gesture with his hand. "What is that device?" Vex demanded, pointing to the object in Sanchez's hand. "This?" Sanchez held it up. "Just a flash drive with some cultural exchange materials. Music, art, literature. Thought you might want to know who we are before deciding whether to conquer us or whatever." The casual reference to conquest, the Dominion's sacred mission, delivered in such an offhand manner, sent Vex's anxiety spiraling. These creatures knew the Dominion's purpose, yet displayed no fear. It violated every predictive model of first contact behavior. "You will come with me," Vex ordered, struggling to regain control of the situation. "The High Council must be informed of your arrival." "Lead the way," Brenner agreed cheerfully. "This place is like a maze. Love the architecture. Though, very evil overlord chic. You guys must have a great interior decorator." As Vex led the humans through the obsidian corridors, he frantically composed a preliminary report in his mind. Security failure of unprecedented magnitude. Aliens displaying inexplicable lack of appropriate terror. Possible technological capabilities exceeding intelligence estimates. "Why are you walking so far ahead?" Lieutenant Sanchez called from behind him. "Is this some kind of protocol thing? Do we need to keep a weird distance?" 7 paces is the regulation separation between a diplomatic attaché and unknown entities, Vex explained stiffly. "That's oddly specific," Dr. Priyakumar commented. "Is there a reason for 7 specifically? Cultural significance?" Vex hesitated. No one had ever asked about the reasons behind protocols before. "The Supreme Leader decreed it," he finally answered, which was the only explanation that had ever mattered. "Your Supreme Leader sounds like he's got some control issues," Sanchez remarked. Vex nearly stumbled in shock. Such words about Supreme Leader Drathar would earn any Dominion citizen immediate execution. He quickened his pace, trying to put more distance between himself and these dangerous, protocol-ignorant creatures. They passed several high-ranking dignitaries in the corridor, representatives from worlds long since absorbed into the Dominion. Each dignitary prostrated themselves appropriately as Vex passed, their foreheads touching the obsidian floor in the required display of submission. "What's with the bowing?" Brenner asked loudly. "Is there a religious aspect to your government?" Before Vex could formulate a response that wouldn't constitute treason, Brenner had already stopped beside one of the prostrated figures, an ambassador from the silicon-based civilization of the Draconis sector. "Hey there," the human said, crouching down to the ambassador's level. "No need for that on our account. We're just visitors." The ambassador's crystalline form trembled in terror at being directly addressed. "Captain," Vex hissed urgently, "it is forbidden to speak to the representatives of conquered worlds without proper authorization." "Conquered?" Dr. Priyakumar's expression shifted to something unreadable. "These are representatives of worlds your Dominion has taken over?" "They have been granted the privilege of serving the Quantum Dominion," Vex corrected, using the official terminology. The 3 humans exchanged glances that Vex couldn't interpret. "We should continue to the High Council chamber," he insisted, desperate to hand over responsibility for these protocol nightmares to his superiors. As they approached the grand entrance to the council chamber, Vex noticed the humans examining the ceremonial refreshments laid out for dignitaries awaiting audience, carefully proportioned nutrition cubes designed to sustain but not satisfy. A subtle reminder of the Dominion's control over even the most basic needs. To his horror, Captain Brenner casually picked up a nutrition cube and bit into it. "Wow," the human said, making a face. "That's impressively bland. It's like someone went out of their way to remove all possible flavor." "Those are not for unauthorized consumption," Vex exclaimed. "Sorry about that," Brenner said, setting the half-eaten cube back on the tray. "Just trying to experience your culture. Cultural exchange is a two-way street, you know." The massive doors to the council chamber swung open before Vex could respond. Inside, the full assembly of the High Council sat in tiered semicircles, their attention focused on the massive obsidian throne at the chamber's center. Upon that throne, surrounded by artificially generated shadows and the continuous low hum of intimidation frequencies, sat Supreme Leader Drathar himself. Drathar's physical form was deliberately intimidating, 3 meters tall even when seated, with ornate biomechanical augmentations that extended from his shoulders like the mandibles of some prehistoric predator. His ceremonial headdress rose another 2 meters above his actual head, adorned with the rare metals of conquered worlds. His eyes glowed with implanted bioluminescence, and his voice was processed through modulators to reach the precise frequency that triggered fear responses in most sentient species. Zorn Vex. The Supreme Leader's amplified voice boomed through the chamber. Explain the meaning of this breach in protocols. Vex dropped immediately to the proper prostration position, his forehead pressed against the cold floor. Supreme Leader, these beings claim to represent the planet Earth. They somehow penetrated our security systems and request diplomatic recognition. Rise and step aside, Drathar commanded. Vex obeyed instantly, moving to his assigned position at the periphery of the chamber. From there, he watched in mounting horror as the 3 humans strode forward, maintaining eye contact with the Supreme Leader, a capital offense on 17,000 worlds. Supreme Leader Drathar, I presume, Captain Brenner said, stopping at a casual distance from the throne. Captain Jake Brenner of Earth. We come in peace and all that. A deadly silence fell over the chamber. No one addressed the Supreme Leader without being specifically commanded to speak. No one presumed to guess the Supreme Leader's identity. No one approached the throne without crawling on their belly, as galactic protocol demanded. Drathar's luminous eyes narrowed. You stand before the absolute ruler of the Quantum Dominion, conqueror of 17 galactic sectors, destroyer of the Andromeda Resistance, the eternal sovereign of— That's quite a title, Lieutenant Sanchez interrupted, seemingly oblivious to the collective gasp from the assembled dignitaries. Must be hard to fit on business cards. Drathar's massive form went rigid with shock. In 10,000 cycles, no one had interrupted his formal introduction. And what's with the big headpiece? Sanchez continued, gesturing toward the towering ceremonial headdress. Seems like it would give you neck problems. No offense, but it kind of looks like you're compensating for something. The chamber's temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Guard Captain Morza's hand moved to her plasma rifle. The assembled dignitaries pressed their foreheads harder against the floor, as if trying to phase through it to escape what was surely coming. You dare, Drathar began, his voice so low and terrible that the chamber's architecture amplified it into a physical force. To enter my domain uninvited, to speak without permission, to mock the sacred symbols of Dominion authority? Not mocking, Dr. Priyakumar interjected calmly. Engaging in cultural observation and exchange. On Earth, direct communication is valued over ritualized intimidation. We mean no disrespect. We simply communicate differently. Silence! Drathar thundered, rising to his full height. The throne's elevation system activated automatically, raising him even higher above the chamber floor. You will learn the meaning of respect through pain and submission, as all species must. He gestured sharply, and Guard Captain Morza raised her weapon, aiming directly at Captain Brenner's head. Hold on, Brenner said, raising his hand. Incredibly. Morza hesitated, not because of the gesture, but because of the small device the human had suddenly produced from his pocket. Before you vaporize us, or whatever you're planning, you should know that this transmitter is currently broadcasting everything happening in this chamber back to Earth. Drathar froze. Impossible! Our security countermeasures? are about 40 years behind our technology. Sanchez completed the sentence with a shrug. Like we said earlier, might want to update those systems. If anything happens to us, Brenner continued, his casual tone now underlaid with steel, this broadcast ensures that Earth will have complete intelligence on your headquarters, your security weaknesses, and your leadership structure. Our planet might be small, but we're very, very good at asymmetric warfare when provoked. It was a bluff. Vex was almost certain it was a bluff. Earth couldn't possibly have the technology to penetrate the Dominion's quantum encryption and communication jammers. Could they? But the Supreme Leader's hesitation suggested he wasn't willing to take that chance. Furthermore, Dr. Priyakumar added, stepping forward, we've come to propose an alternative to the standard conquer or be conquered narrative that seems to be your default approach. What alternative could possibly exist? Drathar demanded, though Vex noted with shock that the Supreme Leader had not ordered the immediate execution of these protocol-violating creatures. Cultural exchange, Priyakumar said simply. Trade. Mutual learning. Possibly even, though this might be a radical concept for your empire. Friendship. Friendship? The word seemed foreign in Drathar's modulated voice. Yeah. It's this weird thing where different groups actually get along without one dominating the other. Sanchez explained. We've got tons of resources on Earth that might interest you, and not just material ones. Art, music, literature, cuisine. Dominion citizens have no need for such frivolities. Guard Captain Morza snapped, her rifle still trained on the humans. Really? Brenner raised an eyebrow. No offense, but this place could use some lightening up. The constant fog, the doom music, the mandatory groveling. It all seems a bit exhausting, doesn't it? For the first time, Vex saw uncertainty flicker across Supreme Leader Drathar's face. It was gone in an instant, replaced by the customary mask of imperial disdain. But it had been there, a momentary crack in 10,000 years of absolute authority. You suggest, Drathar said slowly, that we should abandon the principles that have built the greatest empire in galactic history in favor of exchanging recipes and music? Not abandon, Dr. Priyakumar corrected. Expand. Evolution isn't abandonment, it's adaptation. The Quantum Dominion has clearly mastered the art of conquest. But what comes after? What's the purpose of all this power, if not to create something meaningful with it? The chamber had fallen into a silence so complete that Vex could hear the subtle hiss of the fog machines working overtime to maintain the atmosphere of dread. The assembled dignitaries remained prostrate, but Vex could sense their attention had shifted from fear of punishment to genuine curiosity about how this unprecedented exchange would conclude. Supreme Leader Drathar studied the three humans, his luminous eyes unreadable. Then, to the astonishment of every being in the chamber, he made a subtle gesture toward Guard Captain Morza. She lowered her weapon, though her expression suggested she did so under protest. All but the Earth representatives will leave this chamber, Drathar commanded, his voice still carrying the harmonics of intimidation, but somehow lacking its usual force. The assembled dignitaries scrambled to obey, backing away on their knees as protocol demanded. Vex moved to follow them, relief flooding through him at the prospect of escaping this tension-filled room. Not you, Zorn Vex, the Supreme Leader called. You will remain as witness. Vex froze, then returned to his position, dread pooling in his stomach. To be singled out by the Supreme Leader was rarely a positive development. When the massive doors had closed behind the last of the departing council members, Drathar did something unprecedented in Dominion history. He deactivated his throne's elevation system, lowering himself to the same level as the humans. "You are either the bravest or the most foolish creatures I have encountered in 10,000 cycles," he said, his voice modulator deactivated, revealing a surprisingly ordinary vocal timbre. "We get that a lot," Captain Brenner admitted, with another of those tooth-baring expressions that Vex was beginning to recognize as a smile. "But we've found that sometimes the best way to deal with intimidation is to just not be intimidated." "Explain," Drathar demanded, leaning forward with what appeared to be genuine curiosity. "Earth has had its share of would-be conquerors and dictators," Dr. Priyakumar explained. "What we've learned through our history is that fear-based systems eventually collapse under their own weight. They require constant escalation of intimidation tactics, leave no room for innovation, and ultimately stagnate. The quantum dominion has ruled for 10,000 cycles," Drathar countered. "That hardly suggests stagnation." "With respect," Priyakumar continued, "when was the last time your empire created something new? Not conquered something new, but actually created. Art, technology, philosophy?" The question hung in the air. Vex held his breath, certain that such impertinence would finally trigger the Supreme Leader's legendary wrath. Instead, Drathar seemed to be considering the question. "Creation is irrelevant," he finally answered. "Power is the only currency that matters in the cosmos." "Is it, though?" Lieutenant Sanchez asked. "I mean, what's the point of all this?" He gestured around the chamber. "The fog machines, the scary music, the giant headdress. Who are you trying to impress? And more importantly, are you having any fun?" "Fun?" Drathar repeated the word as if it were in an alien language. "Yeah, fun, enjoyment, pleasure." Sanchez grinned. "Life's too short, even for species with extended lifespans, to spend it all being feared but never enjoyed." A strange expression crossed Drathar's face, one that Vex, in 20 years of service, had never seen before. It almost looked like longing. "Permit me a demonstration," Dr. Priyakumar said, reaching slowly into a pocket of her strange garment. She withdrew a small device, similar to the one Captain Brenner had claimed was broadcasting to Earth. Drathar tensed, but made no move to stop her as she manipulated the device's surface. Suddenly, sound filled the chamber, but not the usual ominous tones designed to instill dread. This was something entirely different. Complex rhythms, interweaving melodies. Sounds that Vex had never imagined possible. "This is called jazz fusion," Priyakumar explained as the music played. "A combination of different Earth musical traditions that evolved when separate cultures began collaborating instead of conquering." The sound was chaotic, yet somehow harmonious, unpredictable, yet structured. Vex found himself swaying slightly before catching himself. Such a response to unauthorized stimuli was dangerously close to protocol violation. But the Supreme Leader himself seemed transfixed by the strange sounds. His luminous eyes had dimmed slightly, focusing inward as if processing new sensory information. "This creation," he said slowly. "It serves no tactical purpose." "Not everything needs a tactical purpose," Captain Brenner replied. "Some things exist simply because they bring joy, or provoke thought, or express something that can't be communicated any other way." Drathar was silent for a long moment. Then, with a gesture that sent Vex's protocol-obsessed mind reeling, he reached up and removed his massive ceremonial headdress. Without it, he looked almost ordinary, tired. "Even in 10,000 cycles," the Supreme Leader said quietly. "You are the first beings to laugh in my presence without being immediately executed." Well, fear and humor don't really mix well, Sanchez observed, hard to be terrified and amused at the same time. And yet, Drathar mused, your ability to find humor in the face of potential annihilation is intriguing. It suggests a resilience my advisors failed to identify in their reports. Humans are pretty resilient, Brenner agreed. We've nearly destroyed ourselves more times than I can count. But we keep bouncing back, usually with better jokes about our near misses. For the first time in Dominion history, Supreme Leader Drathar did something that made Vex question whether he was hallucinating. He laughed. It was a rusty sound, unpracticed and awkward, but unmistakably a laugh. Perhaps, Drathar said, setting his headdress aside entirely. There is something to be learned from your species after all. That's the spirit, Brenner grinned. So, how about we skip the whole submission or annihilation routine and move straight to the cultural exchange portion of First Contact? Drathar considered this for a moment, then pressed a control on his throne's armrest. The fog machine sputtered and went silent. The background music, which had been playing the same doom-laden compositions for centuries, faded away, leaving only the sound of the humans' jazz still filling the air. Zorn Vex, the Supreme Leader said, turning his attention to the still stunned diplomatic attaché. You will establish a new protocol for interaction with representatives of Earth. They are to be granted. He hesitated, searching for the right terminology. Special diplomatic status. Yes, Supreme Leader. Vex managed to respond, trying to process this unprecedented development. And have suitable refreshments brought to my private chambers, Drathar continued, rising from his throne with a fluidity that his usual ceremonial movements never permitted. Something other than nutrition cubes. I might have just the thing, Captain Brenner said, reaching into a pocket of his uniform. He produced a small flask made of some metallic material. Whiskey, an Earth specialty. Best enjoyed in comfortable chairs with good conversation. Comfortable chairs, Drathar repeated thoughtfully. An unusual concept, but perhaps worth investigating. As the Supreme Leader led the three humans toward his private chambers, walking alongside them rather than ahead, in complete violation of every protocol, he glanced back at Vex. The standard protocols will resume for all other business, he instructed. This exception applies only to Earth representatives. Understood, Supreme Leader. Vex responded automatically, though in truth he understood nothing about what had just transpired. Left alone in the massive council chamber, with the fog machines silent and the intimidation frequencies deactivated, Vex found himself experiencing an unfamiliar sensation. It took him several moments to identify it. So rare was its occurrence in the obsidian halls of the Dominion. It was hope. 3 cycles later. The Treaty of Cultural Exchange between Earth and the Quantum Dominion was formally signed in the Grand Council Chamber. The ceremony bore little resemblance to traditional Dominion protocols. The fog machines remained off. The usual ominous background music had been replaced by a rotating selection of Earth compositions. Jazz fusion, alternating with something Captain Brenner called classic rock. Supreme Leader Drathar wore a simplified crown rather than his traditional headdress. The attending dignitaries stood rather than prostrated themselves. And most shocking of all, there was laughter. Not the nervous titter of terrified subjects, but the genuine mirth of beings engaged in actual communication. As senior diplomatic attaché, Vex had been assigned primary responsibility for implementing the new Earth protocols throughout the Dominion's diplomatic corps. It had been the most challenging assignment of his career, requiring him to dismantle thousands of years of tradition and rethink the fundamental purpose of diplomatic interaction. Quite a change from when we first arrived, isn't it? Dr. Priyakumar observed, appearing at Vex's side as he monitored the proceedings. Indeed, Vex agreed, still finding it strange to speak to an alien as an equal rather than a conquered subject or potential enemy. The Supreme Leader has initiated reviews of protocols throughout the Dominion. There is talk of establishing similar cultural exchanges with other worlds previously considered only for conquest. That's encouraging. Priyakumar smiled. Change doesn't happen overnight, but this is a good start. Across the chamber, Supreme Leader, Drathar and Captain Brenner were engaged in animated conversation, with the Supreme Leader actually laughing at something the human had said. Nearby, Lieutenant Sanchez was demonstrating what he called a fist bump to several bewildered but intrigued Dominion guards. I still don't understand, Vex admitted, watching these interactions with continued amazement. How did you know your approach would work? That the Supreme Leader wouldn't simply order your immediate execution? Dr. Priyakumar considered the question thoughtfully. We didn't know for certain, she finally answered. But our research suggested that the Dominion's reliance on fear indicated a fundamental insecurity. True confidence doesn't require constant displays of intimidation. And the broadcast device? The one Captain Brenner claimed was transmitting to Earth? A smile flickered across Priyakumar's face. Let's just say, not all of our technology is as advanced as we implied. Sometimes the appearance of capability is as effective as the capability itself. A bluff, Vex translated, the concept still novel to his protocol-oriented mind. A diplomatic maneuver, Priyakumar corrected gently, creating space for a better outcome. At the center of the chamber, Supreme Leader Drathar raised his hands for attention. The assembled dignitaries and Earth representatives fell silent. To commemorate this historic agreement, Drathar announced, his voice unmodulated and natural. We present to the representatives of Earth this token of the Dominion's commitment to our new partnership. He gestured, and Guard Captain Morsa stepped forward, carrying a small obsidian cube inlaid with rare metals from across the Dominion's territories. It was a traditional symbol of conquest, repurposed as a gift, another unprecedented change in protocol. Captain Brenner accepted the cube with appropriate gravity, then nodded to Lieutenant Sanchez, who stepped forward carrying something wrapped in cloth. And we present to the Quantum Dominion this symbol of Earth's creative spirit and hopes for our future relationship, Brenner announced, unwrapping the object. It was a sculpture of an eagle, wings spread as if in flight, carved from some pale material that Vex didn't recognize. Unlike Dominion art, which was geometric and precise, this piece had a fluid, organic quality that suggested motion even in stillness. Carved from the wood of an earth oak tree, Dr. Priyakumar explained, as Drathar examined the sculpture with evident fascination. The eagle represents freedom and vision in many Earth cultures, the ability to soar above limitations and see new possibilities. A fitting symbol, Drathar declared, displaying the sculpture for all to see. From this day forward, it will stand in the council chamber as a reminder of new possibilities. The assembly applauded, another Earth custom that had been integrated into the ceremony. Vex joined in, the unfamiliar gesture somehow satisfying in its symbolic affirmation. As the formal ceremony concluded and the gathering transitioned to what Captain Brenner had termed a reception, apparently a form of ritualized socializing involving food, drink, and informal conversation, Vex found himself approached by the Supreme Leader himself. Your implementation of the new protocols has been exemplary, Zorn Vex, Drathar said, eschewing his throne to stand directly before the diplomatic attaché. I am appointing you ambassador to Earth, effective immediately. Vex blinked in surprise, Supreme Leader, I am honored. But I have no experience with this form of diplomatic relationship. None of us do, Drather pointed out with unexpected pragmatism. That is precisely why you are suited to the role. You have demonstrated adaptability in the face of change. I will serve to the best of my ability, Vex responded, automatically beginning to bow before catching himself. The Earth protocol specified eye contact and a firm nod instead. There is much to learn from these humans, Drathar continued, watching the Earth representatives mingling with Dominion officials. Their resilience through humor, their creativity through collaboration rather than coercion. These are not weaknesses as our intelligence initially categorized them, but strengths we have yet to develop. A most astute observation, Supreme Leader. Vex agreed, still adjusting to this new, conversational relationship with the Dominion's absolute ruler. Perhaps, Drathar said, his luminous eyes dimming to a contemplative glow. After 10,000 cycles of expanding outward through conquest, it is time for the Dominion to grow inward through creation. As Vex considered this profound shift in imperial philosophy, Lieutenant Sanchez approached with glasses of what appeared to be the Earth beverage whiskey. "Hope I'm not interrupting anything important," the human said, offering the glasses with a grin. "Just thought our new friends might want to join in the toast." "Toast?" Drathar inquired, accepting the glass with surprising grace for someone unaccustomed to being handed objects directly. "Another Earth custom," Vex explained, drawing on his intensive study of human traditions over the past 3 cycles. A ritualized affirmation before consuming beverages together. "Quick study," Sanchez nodded approvingly to Vex. "You'll do well on Earth." Captain Brenner and Dr. Priyakumar joined them, each holding their own glasses. Around the chamber, other Earth representatives were distributing the beverage to curious Dominion officials. "To new beginnings," Brenner proposed, raising his glass. "To cultural exchange," Dr. Priyakumar added. "To finding better ways to use power than just showing it off." Sanchez contributed with his characteristic directness. Drather considered for a moment, then raised his own glass. "To the power of laughter in the face of fear," he offered, his voice free of its former intimidating resonance. "To the power of laughter," Vex echoed, raising his glass and completing the circle, as the strange liquid burned a pleasant path down his throat. Vex reflected on the extraordinary transformation he had witnessed. In just 3 cycles, the immovable protocols of 10,000 years had begun to shift. The feared Supreme Leader now engaged in conversation rather than monologue. The obsidian halls still stood, but they were filled with music rather than intimidation frequencies, with exchange rather than submission. And it had all begun with laughter, with 3 humans who had stood before the most feared being in 17 galactic sectors and simply refused to be afraid. Across the chamber, the wooden eagle seemed to catch the light in a way that made its wings appear momentarily in motion, as if it were about to take flight into new, uncharted territories, much like the Dominion itself. "Ambassador Vex," Captain Brenner said, interrupting his reflections. "We should discuss your upcoming visit to Earth. Fair warning, our protocols are basically to ignore protocols. Think you can handle that?" Vex had considered the challenge inherent in the question. 3 cycles ago, he would have found the very concept of protocol-free interaction terrifying. Now, he found himself intrigued by the possibilities. "I believe," he said carefully, "that I would like to try." "That's the spirit," Brenner grinned, clapping him on the shoulder. Yet another violation of traditional Dominion personal space requirements that somehow felt right in this new context. First lesson in Earth diplomacy. Sometimes the best response to intimidation is a good joke. "I am not certain I understand the concept of jokes adequately yet," Vex admitted. Don't worry, Lieutenant Sanchez assured him. By the time you leave Earth, you'll not only understand them, you'll be telling them, maybe even inventing some new ones. Creating rather than conquering, Vex mused, the Supreme Leader's words echoing in his mind. Exactly, Dr. Priyakumar nodded. That's what cultural exchange is all about. As the reception continued around them, with Dominion officials cautiously attempting Earth customs and humans enthusiastically engaging with alien traditions, Vex realized that he was witnessing the birth of something unprecedented in the history of the Quantum Dominion. A conquest not of territory or resources or even minds, but of fear itself. The humans had met the Empire's supreme leader and laughed in his face. And in doing so, they had not diminished his power, but transformed it into something potentially greater. The power to create rather than destroy, to connect rather than control. It was, Vex decided as he watched Supreme Leader Drathar attempt an Earth dance move to the obvious delight of the human representatives, the most profound conquest of all.